April 28th, 1945, Berlin. Klaus Steinberg stood at his post in the Flak tower at Friedrichshain, watching the city burn. He was 23 years old, but his eyes carried the exhaustion of a man who had lived 3 lifetimes. The concrete fortress rose 12 stories above the shattered streets, its walls thick enough to withstand anything the Allies could throw at it. For 3 years, Klaus had manned the anti-aircraft guns here, tracking bombers, calculating trajectories, sending shells screaming into the night sky. But now the sky was empty of Allied planes. The threat came from the ground. Soviet artillery pounded the eastern districts without mercy. The Reichstag was surrounded. The Führer's bunker had gone silent, and Klaus stood at his station, counting the remaining shells for the 3rd time that hour. 74. Not enough. Never enough. Steinberg. Klaus turned to see Hauptmann Friedrich Wolf emerging from the stairwell. The tower commander was a career officer with iron-gray hair and a face that rarely showed emotion. But today, something was different. Today, Wolf's hands trembled slightly as he lit a cigarette. "Sir," Klaus said, straightening. Wolf crossed to the observation window and stared out at the burning city. Smoke columns rose like black pillars against the gray sky. In the distance, Klaus could hear the distinctive crack of tank fire. The Soviets were getting closer. "How many shells?" Wolf asked. 74, sir. Gun crews? 6 men operational. Hansen took shrapnel this morning." Wolf nodded slowly, drawing on his cigarette. "The Soviets have broken through at Alexanderplatz. They'll be here within hours, maybe less." Klaus felt his chest tighten. "Our orders." Wolf turned to face him. In the harsh light filtering through the gun port, the commander looked older than Klaus had ever seen him. "We hold. To the last shell. To the last man." The words settled between them like a death sentence. "And the civilians, sir?" Klaus asked quietly. Beneath their feet, deep in the reinforced chambers of the tower, 300 Berliners had taken shelter. Families, children, old men who remembered when Berlin was beautiful. They had come seeking protection from the bombs, from the artillery, from the Soviet forces that promised only chaos and revenge. Wolf's jaw tightened. "They stay where they are. The doors remain sealed. Sir, if we abandon our posts, the Soviets will storm this tower," Wolf said, his voice hard. "And if that happens, those people below will have no protection at all. We hold this position. We give them time. That's the only chance they have." Klaus wanted to ask, time for what? Time for a relief force that wasn't coming? Time for a miracle in a war that had run out of miracles? But he knew better than to voice those questions. "Understood, sir," he said instead. Wolf placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're a good soldier, Steinberg. Whatever happens in the next few hours, you've done your duty. Remember that." Then the commander turned and disappeared back down the stairwell, leaving Klaus alone with the guns and the smoke and the sound of a dying city. Klaus returned to his station and pulled on his headset. The radio chatter was chaos. Scattered units called for support that would never arrive. Officers demanded reinforcements from divisions that no longer existed. And beneath it all, the constant grinding static of a communication network collapsing in on itself. At 1900 hours, a new voice cut through the noise. Cold, precise, unmistakably SS. "All units, this is Citadel Command. Berlin Defense Network is to maintain all positions. No retreat, no surrender. Any officer authorizing withdrawal will be subject to immediate field execution. Heil Hitler." Klaus pulled off the headset and set it on the console. His hands were shaking. He stared at them for a moment, watching the tremor he couldn't control, then clenched them into fists. How had it come to this? How had they gone from the victories of 1942? This, hiding in a concrete tower, waiting for the end, taking orders from men who were probably already dead or fled. A sound from below interrupted his thoughts. Voices, shouting. Klaus moved to the stairwell access and descended 2 levels. The voices grew louder as he approached the main shelter area. When he reached the heavy steel door that separated the gun decks from the civilian quarters, he found a crowd pressed against it from the other side. He could see them through the small observation window, 40, maybe 50 people crammed into the narrow corridor. A young mother held a crying infant. An old man leaned on a cane, his face pale. A teenage boy with wild eyes kept pounding on the door. Klaus opened the communication slot. "Step back from the door." The crowd shifted, and a middle-aged man in a torn suit pushed forward. "Obergefreiter, you have to let us out. We need to leave before the Russians get here." "The streets aren't safe," Klaus said. "You're better protected inside." "Protected?" A woman's voice, sharp with fear. "We're trapped. When the Soviets come, we'll have nowhere to run." The crowd murmured agreement, a low rumble of desperation. Klaus felt the weight of their eyes on him through the window. These weren't soldiers. They hadn't signed up for this war. They were shopkeepers and clerks and mothers and children who just wanted to survive another day. "I don't have the authority to open the doors," he said. "Captain's orders are." "The captain isn't down here," the woman shouted. "You soldiers will be fine. You have guns, you have escape routes. What do we have?" The man in the suit leaned closer to the window. "Please, I have a daughter. She's 8 years old. If the Soviets break through while we're locked in here..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They had all heard the stories, the refugees from the east, the reports of what happened when the Red Army took a city. Revenge for 4 years of invasion. Revenge for Stalingrad and Leningrad and 20 million Soviet dead. Klaus closed his eyes. I'll speak to the commander." "When?" the man pressed. "Soon. Just stay calm. Stay quiet. Don't draw attention." He closed the communication slot before anyone could respond and climbed back to his station. His legs felt heavy, like he was wading through deep water. When he reached the gun deck, he found Wolf standing at the observation post, binoculars pressed to his eyes. "Sir, the civilians are getting restless. They want to be evacuated." Wolf didn't lower the binoculars. "And go where exactly? Into streets filled with Soviet tanks? Into a city that's burning block by block?" "They're scared, sir. We're all scared, Steinberg." Wolf finally lowered the binoculars and turned. "But fear doesn't change our orders. This tower is the safest place in Berlin right now. Those doors stay sealed." Klaus hesitated. "And when the Soviets arrive? If they take the tower, they take it. But we make them pay for every meter. We give those people below every extra minute we can." It sounded noble. It sounded like duty. But Klaus couldn't shake the image of that 8-year-old girl trapped in the dark, waiting for the walls to come down. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. Night fell over Berlin like a shroud. The artillery barrage continued, a constant rhythm of destruction that made sleep impossible. Klaus sat at his station, monitoring the silent radio, watching the eastern horizon glow orange with fire. At 0200 hours, the radio crackled to life. "Tower 4, this is Tower 2. We're being overrun. Soviet infantry in the lower levels. The transmission cut off in a burst of static and gunfire. Klaus felt ice flood his veins. Tower 2 was less than a kilometer away. He grabbed his binoculars and scanned the darkness. There, movement in the streets below. Shadows flowing between the ruined buildings. The distinctive shape of T-34 tanks, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. "Sir," Klaus called down the stairwell. "Soviet armor approaching from the east." Wolf appeared moments later, followed by 3 other crew members. They took their positions at the guns without a word. Klaus tracked the lead tank through his sights. Range 800 meters, closing fast. "Hold fire," Wolf ordered. "Wait until they're committed to the approach." The tanks rolled forward, turrets swiveling, searching for targets. Behind them, Klaus could see infantry, dozens of them, moving in quick bursts between cover points. 700 meters, 600. "Sir," one of the gunners said nervously. "Hold," Wolf repeated, his voice calm. 500 meters. The lead tank was fully exposed now, moving down the central boulevard toward the tower. "Fire." Klaus pressed the trigger. The 88mm gun roared, the recoil shaking the entire platform. The shell streaked through the darkness and slammed into the lead tank's turret. The explosion lit up the street like daylight. The tank ground to a halt, smoke pouring from its hatches. "Reload!" Wolf shouted. The crew moved like a machine. Shell in, breach closed, ready. The other tanks had scattered, seeking cover, but the infantry kept coming, using the burning wreck as cover. Klaus fired again, and again. Each shell found its mark. A tank, a building housing enemy troops, a support vehicle. The 88 had been designed to hit bombers at altitude. At ground level, it was devastating. But the Soviets kept coming. For every tank they destroyed, 2 more appeared. For every infantry squad they cut down, another replaced it. The enemy wasn't trying to be clever or tactical. They were simply overwhelming the position with numbers. 70 shells became 60. 60 became 50. At 0400 hours, the radio crackled again. All towers, this is Citadel. If you can hear this transmission, Berlin command has collapsed. All units are to continue defense independently. No further orders will be issued. God be with you. Then, silence. Wolf removed his headset slowly, as if it weighed 100 kilos. He looked at Klaus, and in that moment, they both understood. There was no command, no relief, no escape plan. They were alone. Keep firing, Wolf said quietly. Make every shot count. Dawn came gray and cold. The tower was surrounded now. Soviet troops had taken up positions in the buildings across the street, pinning them down with machine gun fire. Tanks sat hull down behind rubble piles, waiting. Klaus had 23 shells left. The crew had shrunk to 4 men. Weber had taken a sniper's bullet through the neck. Hoffman had collapsed from exhaustion and couldn't be revived. The rest were exhausted, running on adrenaline and fear. At 0800 hours, Klaus heard something that made his blood run cold, pounding on the steel door from below. Not the desperate knocking of scared civilians. This was deliberate, rhythmic, someone trying to break through. He descended to the access point and looked through the observation window. The crowd had grown. Now there were over 100 people packed into the corridor, and at the front, a group of men had found a piece of pipe and were using it as a battering ram against the door. "Stop!" Klaus shouted through the communication slot. "You need to stay. We're getting out," the man in the suit yelled back. His face was wild, desperate. "You can't keep us here. The Russians are outside. When they break in, they'll kill us all. The door is reinforced for your protection." "It's a cage," a woman screamed. "You've locked us in a cage." The pipe slammed against the door again and again. Klaus turned and ran back up the stairwell. "Sir, the civilians are trying to break through the door." Wolf looked up from his position at the gun. His face was gray with fatigue. "Can they? The door's designed to withstand bombing. They won't get through it with a pipe. Then let them try. Maybe it'll keep them occupied." The cold practicality of the statement struck Klaus like a physical blow. Wolf wasn't being cruel. He was just stating reality. There was nothing they could do for those people now. Nothing except buy them time. Time for what? Klaus still didn't know. At 1000 hours, a Soviet loudspeaker crackled to life from somewhere in the ruins. "German soldiers in the tower, you are surrounded. You have no ammunition. You have no hope. Surrender now, and you will be treated as prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. Resist further, and you will be destroyed. You have 1 hour to decide." Wolf listened to the announcement, then picked up his rifle and put a bullet through the loudspeaker. The gun crews laughed, harsh, bitter sounds that had nothing to do with humor. 1 hour, Wolf said. "That gives us time to redistribute the remaining ammunition. Steinberg, check the small arms locker. I want every rifle we have distributed to anyone who can hold one." Klaus nodded and headed below. The pounding on the door had stopped. When he looked through the observation window, he saw why. The crowd had pulled back, exhausted, defeated. They sat in small groups along the walls, faces blank with shock. Some were crying, others just stared at nothing. The 8-year-old girl sat with her father, her head on his shoulder. She was sleeping, or pretending to sleep. Klaus couldn't tell which. He turned away and continued to the armory. The hour passed, then 2 hours. The Soviets were waiting for something. At 1400 hours, Klaus found out what. The ground shook. Not from artillery, something bigger, much bigger. Klaus grabbed his binoculars and looked east. His mouth went dry. A massive tank was rolling down the boulevard toward them. But this wasn't a T-34. This was something else entirely. a massive, box-shaped vehicle with a gun barrel the size of a telephone pole. ISU 152, Wolf said quietly beside him. Assault gun. They call it the Zvera Boy. Beast killer. Klaus watched the monster advance. Its gun elevated slowly, deliberately, until it pointed directly at their tower. Down, Wolf screamed. Klaus dove behind the gun mount as the world exploded. The shell hit the tower wall 6 meters below their position. The entire structure shuddered. Concrete dust filled the air. Klaus's ears rang so badly he couldn't hear anything but a high-pitched whine. When his vision cleared, he saw a crater in the wall the size of a car. The 12-foot-thick concrete had been punched through like paper. "It can penetrate," Wolf said, his voice distant through Klaus's damaged hearing. "We can't stop it." The assault gun fired again. This time the shell hit higher, closer. The observation window shattered. Steel fragments flew across the gun deck. One of the crew members screamed and went down, clutching his face. Klaus crawled to his position and tried to sight the assault gun through the scope. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the controls. "Fire at will," Wolf ordered. Klaus pressed the trigger. The 88 roared. The shell streaked toward the assault gun and hit its frontal armor, and bounced off. The armor was too thick, the angle too steep. The shell ricocheted into a nearby building, exploding uselessly. Klaus felt something break inside him. They couldn't hurt it. They couldn't stop it. They could only wait for it to systematically tear the tower apart. He reloaded, fired again. Another bounce. The ISU 152 fired a third time. The shell hit the gun mount next to Klaus's position. The entire platform disintegrated in a blast of heat and shrapnel. Klaus was thrown backward, his back slamming into the console. When he opened his eyes, he saw that half the gun deck was simply gone, exposed to the sky. And where the other gun crew had been standing, there was nothing but smoke and debris. Wolf pulled himself up using a support beam. Blood ran down the side of his face. "Abandon the gun deck. Everyone below." Klaus tried to stand, but his leg wouldn't hold his weight. He looked down and saw a steel fragment the size of his hand embedded in his thigh. The pain hit him a moment later. White hot, all-consuming. Wolf grabbed him under the arm and hauled him toward the stairwell. "Move, Steinberg! Move!" They stumbled down the stairs as another shell hit above them. The walls shook, lights exploded, dust and concrete rained down. They made it to the command level before Wolf let Klaus collapse against the wall. The commander tore open a medical kit and pulled out a bandage. "This is going to hurt," he said. He didn't wait for Klaus to respond. He gripped the fragment and pulled. Klaus screamed, his vision going white. Wolf packed the wound with gauze and wrapped it tight. "Can you walk?" Klaus tested the leg. It felt like fire, but he could put weight on it. "Yes, sir." "Good, because we need to—" An explosion cut him off. Not from above, from below. Wolf and Klaus exchanged glances, then moved to the stairwell leading down. The steel door to the civilian quarters was buckling. The Soviets had breached the lower levels and were working their way up. Klaus could hear Russian voices, sharp commands, the clatter of equipment, and from the other side of the door, he heard screaming. The civilians had heard it too. They knew what was coming. Wolf pulled his pistol. "We make our stand here. When they come through that door—" "Sir," Klaus interrupted. "The civilians." Wolf looked at him, and for the first time Klaus saw something break in the commander's eyes. Not fear, not even resignation, just exhaustion, the complete and total exhaustion of a man who had carried too much for too long. "What would you have me do, Steinberg?" Wolf asked quietly. "Open the door? Let them out into Soviet hands. We both know what will happen." "We don't know that. If they surrender, they won't see civilians. They'll see Germans. They'll see 4 years of invasion and 20 million dead. They'll see revenge." Wolf's voice was flat, emotionless. "The only mercy we can give those people is time. Time to pray. Time to hold their children. Time to say goodbye." Klaus felt something twist in his gut. "That's not mercy, sir. That's cowardice." Wolf's hand moved fast. One moment he was standing with his pistol at his side. The next, the barrel was pressed against Klaus's forehead. "Choose your next words very carefully, Obergefreiter." Klaus looked into the commander's eyes and saw a man at the edge of breaking. A man who had followed orders his entire life, who had done his duty, who had believed that service and sacrifice meant something. And now, at the end of everything, he was being asked to choose between two impossible options. Klaus spoke quietly. "Give me the key to the door, sir." "No. They deserve a choice, even if it's just the choice of how they die." The explosion below came closer, the voices louder. Wolf held the gun steady for another moment, then slowly lowered it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key ring. His hand shook as he held it out. "On your head, Steinberg. This is on your head." Klaus took the keys and limped to the steel door. Through the observation window, he could see the crowd pressed against the barrier. They had heard the fighting. They knew it was almost over. He unlocked the door and pulled it open. The crowd surged forward, then stopped when they saw his face. "The Soviets are in the building," Klaus said. "They'll be here in minutes, maybe less. If you stay in the shelter, you'll be trapped. If you run, you might make it, or you might not. The choice is yours." For a moment, no one moved. Then the man in the suit grabbed his daughter's hand and pushed forward. Others followed. The young mother with her baby, the old man with his cane, the teenage boy with the wild eyes. They fled down the corridor, toward the emergency exits, toward the streets, toward whatever fate waited for them outside. Some stayed, the elderly who couldn't run, the injured, those who had given up. Klaus stood in the doorway and watched them go. Then he turned back to Wolf. The commander was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, his pistol in his lap. He looked up at Klaus with eyes that had seen too much. "You were right," Wolf said quietly. "I was being a coward." An explosion rocked the stairwell below. Russian voices, much closer now. Wolf stood and checked his weapon. "How many rounds do you have?" Klaus checked his rifle. 12. "Good. That'll have to be enough." They took positions on either side of the stairwell entrance and waited. The first Soviet soldier appeared 10 seconds later. Young, maybe 19, his PPS H-41 submachine gun leading the way. Wolf shot him twice in the chest. The soldier fell backward into the soldiers behind him. Then the world became noise and fire. Klaus fired until his rifle was empty, then drew his pistol. Beside him, Wolf fought with mechanical precision, each shot carefully placed, conserving ammunition. But there were too many. For every Soviet soldier they dropped, 2 more appeared. Klaus felt something punch into his shoulder. Then his side. His legs gave out and he collapsed against the wall. Wolf was still firing, still fighting. The old commander refused to fall. Then his pistol clicked empty. A Soviet soldier stepped forward, rifle raised. Wolf met his eyes and smiled. "Heil!" The rifle fired. Klaus watched the commander fall, and something in his chest broke. Not just his ribs, where the second bullet had found him. Something deeper. Soviet soldiers poured into the room. Hands grabbed Klaus, pulling weapons away, shouting in Russian. He couldn't hear them anymore. The ringing in his ears had become a roar, drowning out everything. As they dragged him toward the stairwell, Klaus turned his head and looked one last time at the open door to the civilian shelter. It was empty now. They had all fled, the ones who could run anyway. He hoped some of them made it. He hoped that girl with her father found somewhere safe. He hoped his choice had meant something. But as the darkness closed in and the Soviet soldiers pulled him down into the ruined tower, Klaus Steinberg knew he would never know if he had done the right thing. All he knew was that he had made a choice. In the end, when orders and duty and loyalty to a dying regime all meant nothing, he had looked into the eyes of desperate people and given them the only thing he could, a chance. The radio in the abandoned command room continued to crackle with static, waiting for orders that would never come. The guns fell silent, and in the streets below, Berlin burned on toward its inevitable end. 3 days later, on May 2nd, 1945, the German garrison in Berlin would formally surrender. The war in Europe would end a week after that. Klaus Steinberg would survive his wounds and spend the next 3 years in a Soviet prison camp. He would never speak of what happened in the tower, not to his fellow prisoners, not to his family when he finally returned home, not to anyone. Some choices were too heavy to share. Some stories were meant to be carried alone. But on quiet nights, for the rest of his life, Klaus would close his eyes and see that little girl sleeping on her father's shoulder in the dark shelter beneath a dying tower. And he would wonder if she made it, if his moment of defiance, his moment of humanity in the midst of inhumanity, had given her the chance to grow up, to have children of her own, to live in a world that had finally learned to stop destroying itself. He would never know the answer, but he would always hope. And sometimes, in the mathematics of war and choice and impossible decisions, hope was the only currency that mattered.